Hello, I'm here in Venice on the Salizada San Pantalon in the Dorsoduro district, and I wanted to tell you today about Antonia Padoani Bembo. She was born in 1640, actually in Padova, which is where that middle name comes from. Her father was a doctor there in Padova, but he brought the family to Venice. He was working as a private doctor for someone. And he really believed in a humanist education for his daughter, his only child. So he had her educated in, Roman history, Latin language, rhetoric, poetry, the classic writings, all these things that are part of that education, which was quite unusual for a woman in mid-1600s. And she also turned out to have a beautiful singing voice, and she was much praised for this. So her parents felt that she might have a chance at a good marriage match. So even though they were sort of in the middle class, sort of, they were able to find an arranged marriage for her with Lorenzo Bembo, and the Bembo family is one of the families in the Golden Book of Venice that goes way back as the nobility. So it seemed like quite a good match. And in fact, the young couple, as part of the dowry, they lived on this street with the family where Antonia had grown up. It was supposed to be for 2 years. But we have actual letters from her father saying that Lorenzo was just impossible to live with. He was rude, he disturbed the family's peace, and so Lorenzo really was kicked out. He and his wife were kicked out. And Lorenzo ended up going to war for a couple of years, and he came back. He was having affairs. He just was apparently a pretty awful person. And finally, Antonio asked for a divorce, but was not granted it. At this point, she had 3 children. They had 3 children. Her 2 sons sort of grew up and moved away and started their own lives. But Antonia had her daughter put in a convent, first one and then a second one at Malamocco, and actually had her daughter, had the nuns at the convent hold all of the jewelry and wealth so that her husband couldn't get to it. So you can see that Antonia was quite smart. But what happened then was in 1676, Antonia escaped. She had a friend, some think it was this famous guitarist, who escorted her to Paris. And without telling anyone, she just took off. And she must have had some very good friends and patrons, because she ended up having patronage from the Sun King, King Louis, is it the 16th? I can't read my notes without my glasses. Anyways, King Louis, the Sun King, basically paid for her to live at this place. It wasn't exactly a convent, but it was a home just for women. And there she started composing. She composed 41 pieces of chamber music, and then she also was starting to write some longer pieces, a couple of Te Deums. She set some of the Psalms of David to music, and she wrote a full-length opera called Hercules in Love, I believe it was. And it's quite unusual because women really were expected to be in chambers, in small rooms, not studying music for an opera where you have to kind of know all of the instruments, hold all of those instruments in your head at the same time as you compose this grand piece of music for all the musicians to be playing at once. And yet she did so. She also brought to life women's voices in music, which was really missing because there were so few female composers. So she was quite a remarkable person, and though she ended up living quite a lot of her life outside of Venice, I just felt it was so important to include her in the Beautiful Women in Venice series, because she left out of compulsion to get away from her terrible husband, who wasn't really by choice. But this street, the Salizada San Leo, is where she did live much of her childhood and her early married life. So it gives us a good sense of place for this important composer. Thanks again for watching another episode of Beautiful Woman in Venice.